we will start our first panel. Let me introduce our panelists. Their names are also listed on the projection behind. So we have László Kiss from Discus Holdings, Boldizsár Nagy from Central European University, Ernest Simon from the UNHCR, and Viktor Marsai from the Migration Research Institute. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. So the title of this panel is Immigration, is it a commodity or is it a privilege? And we would like to talk a little bit about this topic, partially in reference to the talk we just heard now from Professor Kaplan. So in his talk and also in his work, Professor Kaplan advocates for the opening of borders and the removal of immigration restrictions, which seems like a sort of utopia for those people who support it. But at the moment, we are experiencing a situation in the EU which is somewhat similar to the opening of borders, namely the influx of people fleeing Ukraine at the moment. So as you all know, the European Union has opened its borders in a physical sense, and we have had hundreds of thousands of people entering the European Union. And to some extent, it has also removed visa and immigration restrictions. This is obviously not as complete as the physical opening of the borders. And it remains to be seen what will actually happen to these people in terms of their future and what kind of status they will acquire in Europe after physically crossing our borders. So the first question I would like to ask each of you, and I think it would be great if each of you could just talk for like 2-3 minutes from your experience about this particular question. The question I would like to ask is, what are the prospects of the people who are currently physically crossing the borders? Namely, many of these people are at the moment not actually refugees. They're not even officially asylum seekers. So they are entering the European Union either because they are already visa-free here, or they are entering upon some kind of special permission. But at the moment, they do not have an official status, many of them in Europe. So I would like to ask you what the options of these people are, but more specifically, in your experience, what are the ways that people choose between these options? So what are the considerations that they take, both in a legal sense, also in a personal or maybe economic sense? So what are the factors that will play into this decision? And what are your predictions? So what will happen to the majority of these people in terms of their eventual status that they acquire? So maybe, Viktor, we will start with you since you are sitting there.
Yeah, I just only the Ukrainian or in general?
At the moment, I'm curious about Ukraine, but I'm also curious about what your experience is based on similar situations that have happened in history.
Yeah, in history never happen similar situations, you know. Yes, very shortly, I think the first is that actually the last 3 weeks what we saw is a rapid influx of people escaping from the war. At the beginning, the UNHCR estimation was that 4 million people could leave Ukraine. Until now, in these last 3 weeks, more than 3 million has already left. So in the coming weeks, the number definitely will increase if some miracle will happen and the war will be open. So likely the number will pass 5, 6, or 7 or more millions. And we had a common roundtable discussion with András Kovács 2 days ago, and he used this term, and I'm sorry I borrow it, that it will not be a sprint, but it will be a marathon. I think it's very important to underline. Both in Hungary, the neighboring countries of Europe, and in the whole European Union and the international community, there was huge enthusiasm and huge support for the now use this term refugee people escaping for the war. And it was and it is great. It was good to be Hungarian, to see that the country, from the civil organization, the society, NGOs, and the government hold together to help the people. But I think it's very important to maintain somehow this attitude in a marathon term, because I'm a little bit skeptical that this whole conflict will be over within weeks. What many Ukrainians still waiting. It's one of the different reasons that many people escaped from Ukraine waiting that the Ukrainian army will beat the Russians within weeks, or some change will happen in Moscow. But I think it's better if we prepared a more pessimistic, realistic scenario that Europe and the member states should deal a huge refugee community in the coming months, perhaps years. And just comparing the numbers, annually, in the last years, the asylum applications to the whole European Union was somewhere between 500, 700,000. So just if the flow of people stop today, it means that almost five, 6 years of whole asylum application, and people try to get protection in the European Union or has already arrived in the last 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you. Adna, would you like to continue?
Well, thank you. I think we all agree that that the most important thing is that the peace should be restored, and this war must be stopped as soon as possible. But yes, the number, our planning figure was already mentioned, that at the beginning of this situation, UNHCR came up with a 4 million number as for the refugees who flee Ukraine and cross the borders, and another 12 million people. We were estimated that around 12 million people will be internally displaced in Ukraine, inside the country, and will be in need of international assistance and help. So yes, by now we do admit that even these planning figures might have been an underestimate. So we might end up with much bigger numbers. These people need help. On the other hand, yes, this is just the first day of the third week of this war. So we are really at the very beginning of this whole crisis. So all we know that Ukrainian nationals have the right to enter EU countries and stay there for 90 days without visas. So I think many of them, or the overwhelming majority of them, haven't made their decisions yet what they want to do with themselves, with their families on the longer run. Also, men, fathers, husbands are not allowed to leave the country. So of course it makes it even more difficult and even more challenging to make long-term plans on the family level. Most of the Ukrainians I managed to talk to, and the first 2 weeks of the crisis I spent in Moldova, mostly at the border between Ukraine and Moldova. I came back to Hungary just this Monday. So most of the people I managed to talk there, and I know that this is the same in Poland, in Slovakia, and Hungary, not many everywhere. They do not want to stay in this region, and they do not only want to go further to the west, but the majority of them have relatives, friends, daughters, brothers, whoever, or they're working and living, most of them with their families, in Western European countries, in Italy, Germany, France, other countries. So they want to join their family members, not just go there and benefit from the welfare state. There is another issue, another very important and probably a burning issue in the short run: the third country nationals who had been living before this war erupted, had been living in Ukraine. And yes, if they were not refugees or asylum seekers or refugees mainly in Ukraine, they do not go under this EU temporary protection directive. So if they can go back, if they can return to their countries of origin, they are unfortunately not protected, even though they had to flee Ukraine for the same reason Ukrainians had to. So when I was still in Moldova at the beginning of last week, a Nigerian doctor who has a Ukrainian wife found me. He found me as the spokesperson in Hungary, so he didn't know that I was at the time in Moldova. Found me on the internet via one of these chat platforms, and I recommended him to read our UNHCR help site, where all the links of the government institutions and NGOs and charity organizations are there, so he could find all the relevant information I thought on that website. But he came back to me that everything was very helpful, but what he was most interested in was not there, if he could work in Hungary. So I think this tells everything, that these people, even third country nationals, I'm not talking only about Ukrainians, they want to come here and find a job, they want to work, they want to have an income to support their families, and this is what they bring from Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What is it?
I may be more optimistic than you are. I mean, having listened to Putin's proposals of yesterday done to Erdogan, no, seriously. I mean, he's seeking for a face-saving way out, an exit strategy. And there might be one. There might be one, a face-saving exit strategy. I mean, lawyers are good at finding appropriate words which can please both parties. So I can easily imagine that that 15-point peace proposal which is on the table leads to an agreement. Therefore, I believe that when we are considering future options, we have to keep in mind that there is an option that the war ends within weeks. And that's a very different option from an ongoing resistance against an occupying power, which is also militarily fairly unlikely. The Russian troops are not large enough and populous enough and technically well equipped to keep such a large country under physical control and military control. That aside, the next point is that nobody wants to be a refugee. Nobody. So the people coming from Ukraine, if they can, they will opt for another legal status. They will not opt for temporary protected status or in the longer term refugee status. It is up to us if we allow that to them. I mean, bear in mind that Poland had like 1 million Ukrainians before the war. Actually, many of them were escaping from Luhansk and Donetsk and elsewhere from Ukraine, but they could live in Poland as regular immigrants, as guest workers, if you want. So that could very well happen with many of those who came now. If you opened up that road, that they receive a residence permit and find jobs, that's easy. So how many refugees we will have will depend on how we regulate, how our biopolitics is, if you want, how we deal with these bodies. Do we consider their agency and let them live as they want? Now, interestingly, because of the visa-free travel for those who have a biometric passport, not everyone, but those Ukrainians who have a biometric passport are visa-free, which gives them the choice where to apply for assistance. They can travel to whichever EU country and there apply for temporary protection. So therefore, the kind of responsibility sharing, which is the big stumbling block within the EU, because they don't want to take in more people seeking international protection, is now circumvented by them who do have biometric passports, because they can travel to Germany or Denmark or wherever they want, Spain, and apply there for temporary protection. And because the Council of the European Union has adopted the decision on temporary protection, they are entitled to temporary protection, which may last in the beginning for 1 year, it can be extended by two times by 6 months, and in exceptional circumstances could be extended by 1 more year. In the meantime, these people are entitled to apply for refugee status if they cannot regularize themselves in any other way. But let them regularize themselves in another way. So that's my answer to what will happen to them. This is not unprecedented. Afghanistan lost 1/3 of its population. At that time, it was 15 million and 5 million left. Syria has lost 1/3 of its population in the recent conflict. So we have seen such scale of flight from a country. I'm more optimistic here than in the previous 2 cases. I don't think that the option of returning under safety and dignity is excluded for the long term. I don't think so.
Thank you very much. Let's see.
The beginning of the year, I asked one of my colleagues, who is actually Hungarian from the Carpat-Ukraine region, of how many people live in the Ukraine. And she said, okay, you want the real number or the official one? The official one is 40 million, and the real one is around 7 or 8 million less, because that's the number of people who already left Ukraine before the war, nothing to do with it. So I do not expect And there is a reason for that, obviously, and we know all the reasons. Usually it's money and careers and so on and so on. Better opportunities. I do not see any serious reason why anybody would like to go back to the Ukraine, which might be half destroyed with the loss of the working places and so on and so on. What's the incentive for them to return? Okay, patriotism and so on and so on. I understand this, but I foresee that more than the half of the, let's say the majority of the so-called refugees, let's call them refugees, I understand the terminology is not that completely right, that people who left because of the war, I think they would like to stay either in the country, could it be like Poland, who is also struggling to find suitable workers, because then they run out of the Polish who went to the West again. This is just really pushing it away. Same way as in Hungary, where when restaurants are looking for waiters and so on. So many fields where manpower is needed. Why would they go back to
See their husbands. They would go back to see their husbands.
Oh, the husband would come here. And the family reunification, and they would say, well, I fought, I do not feel myself safe. Let's presume that the peace would be rather on Russian terms than Ukrainian terms. I think we could safely guess that would be the case. Then they would just simply claim that they would be chased by the Russian authorities or the Russian-loving Ukrainian authorities away. They would just simply leave the Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. So
that's my opinion at the end. So
assuming, I think we can all agree that there will be a large number of Ukrainians who will not return to Ukraine even if the war ends tomorrow. Whether that large number is a few 100,000 or a few million or even more remains to be seen. And from your answers, it's quite clear that some of these people will in fact end up asylum seekers and eventually potentially refugees or under temporary protection, while the others will try to seek another status, which might be more in the realm of what we normally consider immigration and not asylum. So they might seek work permits, they might seek student permits if they are currently students. As Laci said, they might eventually look for family unification ways or try to make an investment, start a business, and so on. So this is more the area in which I find myself working. And one conceptual issue that I find interesting, and it came up in 2 or 3 discussions that we had before this panel with all of you, is that there seems to be both in public perception and also among the professionals a very strict cutting line between who we consider to be a refugee and who we consider to be an immigrant. And officially, the idea is that somebody is a migrant, obviously, if they move to another country, and they are a refugee if they did this by an external circumstance, which might be war or a national disaster, and an immigrant is somebody who does this by choice. This is the official definition. I looked up at these 10 sites because I was very curious about how this is supposed to be perceived. But I think that those of us who work in any area of immigration, migration, or refugee assistance know that this line is very blurred. And in fact, we will see some of these Ukrainians end up as classic immigrants working or going to school or doing businesses. So my question is, how important is this distinction to us, and how important it is that the public should understand that how these categories are related? And the secondary question, and then I'll give you the floor, is how these people actually perceive themselves. So do they understand that being a refugee is one thing and being an immigrant is another, or are they just looking for a practical way to pursue their life and aspirations and find safety and something to do? Laci, maybe?
When you have to run away, you do not care too much about the legal situation you would get in because you have to run away. Then when you settle down, whether it's 1 week or month or so, you have to look at your legal possibilities, what is possible and what is not.
So in your experience, for example, you work in investment immigration, the people who come to you now or have come to you earlier in the framework of some kind of global conflict, how did they consider themselves, or how did they end up choosing a particular way of acquiring a status?
Emotionally, I do not think they care too much of how they are called. It's rather the right of one definition and the rights of the other, which is given to them, was important, not the how they were called. I never Never had an experience where somebody was called as a refugee and he insisted, no, I'm an immigrant. Never had such a case. It doesn't mean anything, maybe just that my sample is just simply too small.
Yes, but I'm sure that we have all seen people who said, no, I'm not an immigrant, I'm a foreign student, I'm an expat, I'm something else. So these labels, I think, are important to people, no?
Yes. Legally, yes, because the rights are different. But otherwise, the fact that I had to run away, I had to leave. If it's only to earn more money with my business, then it's okay, immigration, but that is not really a question because that has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. If somebody is a refugee, which unfortunately was chased away from their own home country, then that's an emotional matter.
Victor?
Go ahead.
Okay, so now I think, speak in general in this whole migration, refugee, asylum seekers, etc. topic, and I think I'm Africanist, so I have a little bit different perspectives in this whole discourse, in which I think all of us, many cases, feel that it's here. Of course, we are in the middle of Europe, and it's very Europe-centric or Western-centric, West and the rest issue, etc. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that in different parts of the world, people have very different concept on this movement, and perhaps it's not accidental that in the literature, many cases, now the term of migration starting to shift to this mobility term. So if you're considering different African countries in which in the nomadic culture, moving between areas, crossing borders, it's absolutely natural. So even the term of migrants for them, it's they don't understand the category, not the distinction between asylum seekers, refugees, migrant, I don't know, economic migrant, etc. But even they don't understand why they need a passport, because in many cases, and it's very important to keep in mind, they don't understand the concept of a state authority. So these issues are very, very different. And yes, in the definition, and we regularly use this migrants when people people leave their countries of origin and go to other countries. But I think it's also very important to keep in our mind that the biggest migration when people leave their home place and move to other place is actually the rural-urban migration in our Earth, which touch hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. And for example, in African context, the big shift is not moving to another country, but to leave, I don't know, my community, my family, my extended family in the countryside and move to the capital or a big city. So I think it's very important.
I mean, let me talk about the broader frame. Refugees, there have always been. Oedipus was a refugee. So, but refugee law did not exist until the end of the First World War. So we, the developed world, create the refugees by way of limiting entry. And so there needs to be a small door through which those who otherwise are excluded can enter. But that is created by us. So answering your question directly, does it make a difference? Oh yes, it does, huge difference. As long as we exclude everyone and give individual permits in the form of visas or visa-free agreements to some millions out of the 7.8 billion to enter, we do need the differentiation between refugees or people who threatened with persecution or harm and other migrants. Moreover, there is one more extremely important difference between regular migrants and those who are forcefully displaced, forced migrants. And that is the trauma. If you are a refugee, then with very few exceptions, you are traumatized. Morally, you are somewhere else than the other one who just chooses, exercising her or his freedom, which should be attributed to her, to move. So I'm very much in favor of an overall freedom of movement. But refugees can be set apart in this process because they didn't choose to move, because they are traumatized, and because they need this exception from the normal immigration regulation. Now, the underlying of that is the following. Normal migration would be a tool to alleviate poverty, as Professor Kaplan amply explains. Giving protection is not primarily aimed at alleviating poverty or balancing income relationships. So conceptually, it's in a different realm. The regulation of migration has to do a lot with labor market, wages, wage levels, etc. And that's why, after the First World War, states decided that they want to control the labor market, and that's why they decided to exclude all others to protect their labor force. But that's a different realm from whether we believe that people whose human rights had been hurt or are threatened should not suffer that. And therefore, I'm in favor of keeping the difference. True enough, once they have arrived and once they can cope with their trauma, then their life paths may be very similar to other immigrants. But that's much later. That's 2-3 years after arrival, when they sort of coalesce with the others.
So I actually have a question for Adna in relation to what was said. So we always think about refugees as people seeking safety, right? Or seeking asylum from some hardship that they are experiencing at home. But once they have crossed the border, it seems to me that the refugee status is more related to welfare. So the measures that we offer them after they have crossed the border differ from people who cross the border without acquiring refugee status or protection by way of what we offer them in terms of welfare support. So we give them housing, we give them maybe some money, we give them free healthcare, whereas a regular Ukrainian person who also crosses under the same circumstance but doesn't request protection ends up getting a work permit instead, or ends up just using their 90-day status, they are not receiving this type of support. So my question is, even though the refugee status or the refugee process starts out from allowing people into the country, is it or should it be defined by social status or economic status or financial status? So should it be, for example, more available to refugees who are poor? Should it be more available to people who are coming without their husbands or the breadwinner of the family? Should it favor children, old people, and so on? So should it be considered a social measure, or are we still talking about something that is available to everyone who is fleeing a war zone?
Well, I'm afraid that we are mixing up many things here. So to be a refugee, it doesn't depend at all on your social status. You flee your home, you flee your home country just because there is a war, just because your life is in danger, just because you are persecuted because of your political views, your religion, your ethnicity, and so on and so on. So you have to flee because of the circumstances. This is not your decision. If you stay, you might die. If you stay, you might be imprisoned and tortured, so you are in danger. And this is valid to poor people and to rich people as well. Even now, on the Ukrainian border, you can see rich people coming, well-off people coming. You can see brand new, even luxury cars, and Ukrainians are driving in those cars, but still they are refugees because their lives were in danger inside the country. For me, maybe because I work for the UN Refugee Agency, this dividing line is not at all blurred. It is, for me, totally clear. A migrant, even if he or she lives in a deep poverty and has no perspectives at all in life, still the person is not in imminent danger. She or he can decide. A refugee cannot. And I think when a refugee arrives to our countries, we might mix up the reasons why the person flees and the consequences that in our countries he or she might get into a better situation than the living situations would have been in the person's own home country ever in their lives. So this is just the difference between two countries or several countries, still the person is a refugee. Still, the person was forced to flee the home country. Still, living here doesn't mean that they live at home, doesn't mean that they live with their friends, with their families. They are in a foreign country with a different culture. They struggle, at least for years, just like Professor has mentioned, they struggle for years to integrate into the labor market, into the society. So their situation is really challenging.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Sorry, Victor first, and then.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think it's also important to underline that when we are speaking about this forced displacement category, which is used by the UNHCR, it contains currently, according to last year report, 85 million people, majority of IDP, so within the country, and let's say 1/3 around is actually refugee who left the country, and a huge percent, at least 80% of these people is living not in the developed world, but the developing world, because now this Ukrainian crisis is turning our attention that, and we are considering that most refugees are in similar situation, and this is the case why we're speaking, whether they are rich people or not rich people, but most refugees are in the developed world, in countries which has very poor social system. It is not accidental, and the main role of UNHCR to support these activities. And it's also because if we have the Geneva Convention, the nearest third country is responsible for the protection of these people, and because the conflicts, for example, in Somalia, most people is in Kenya and Ethiopia, escaping from this part of the world. And I think it's also very important category that we are speaking about this let's say legal migrant and the refugees, and there is a huge scale between them, because if we have a look the number of asylum application in the European Union itself, we see that about 40% is between 30-40% is accepted that they are refugees, they have right according to the Geneva Convention to get some kind of protection, a long-term, a temporary one, etc., etc. But the majority of them actually doesn't have a legal background to stay in the country, whether they arrived legally or illegally to the European Union.
Yes.
I want to join up to Erne and to your question. There's one important element you have to bear in mind in terms of the housing and support. The European Union's asylum law is based on means testing. So if the asylum seeker has assets, then the state is not obliged to help her or him. We do check whether the asylum seeker, so those coming in a luxury car may be excluded from the services according to the European law. It was infamous that the Danish went so far as to confiscate private elements, except for the wedding rings and other symbolic values, to make the asylum system the asylum seeker pay for his or her costs. And that's part of the Hungarian law, and it has always been. You go to a reception center if you cannot provide accommodation for yourself. But it's not by law that everybody who is a refugee would get those services. Only those who can't afford it to themselves.
Okay, thank you. So we still have a few minutes, so I just want to ask a final question, and I was hoping that maybe each of you could give a relatively short answer to my question. So we spoke a little bit, Victor hinted about this, about European attitudes, and Europe is currently dealing with, well, definitely one of the biggest, but an unprecedented migration situation coming in from Ukraine, in the sense that large numbers of people are coming from within Europe, and culturally we are very similar to the people who are arriving compared to the previous situations. So just very quickly, do you have any predictions on how or whether any of this will affect European perception or concepts of immigration? Will the public acquire new beliefs? Will we be faced with things that we have not been faced with before? Are there any attitudes that maybe are already changing 3 or 4 weeks into this situation? And what is the way forward for us Europeans who are trying to navigate this situation. Please.
I think that there was a lot of talk in the last 2 decades about forgetting the Second World War. That now a generation grabbed power which had nothing to do with the Second World War, unlike the previous generation which was a child or a young adult during the Second World War. So the trauma of the World War was largely forgotten in Europe. I think that the first major impact will be that those who didn't learn from the Southern Slav War, which was cruel as hell as well, especially in Bosnia, they will now realize that war is conceivable. Because in our short-sightedness, we ignore the other wars, the war in Yemen, the war in Somalia, which were not less brutal, or Syria. But now I believe that the European public, to a large extent, will realize that this is not an abstract feature of remote continents, that this is again us. The threat of a nuclear war, which has like a cold wind blown across Europe in the last week, that will remind people that we have to choose values, not just the material goods.
Thank you. That's promising.
Well, in a way, I really do agree, because I think refugees are refugees wherever they come from. Wars are, in most of the aspects for a refugee, are the same. The shells, the rockets, the ruins, the death, it is all the same everywhere in Syria, in Somalia, in South Sudan, in Ukraine, everywhere. So I'm a bit afraid that this Ukrainian crisis, well, at least in the last 3 years, I have been seeing that the differences have been underlined. The differences between people fleeing Ukraine and differences between people fleeing other parts of the world. I think this is the similarities which should be stressed.
But
Victor, you're shaking your
no,
head.
but I think also differences, because I think it's not equal that people is leaving his country because in war to the neighboring countries, and then people using asylum shopping and go across 10 different countries, which should provide protection for them, because they choose that no, I don't like this country, I would like to go these countries because I think trees are much better there than here. So
does it mean that the Ukrainians should stay in Hungary and not go to Ireland? There are roughly 10 countries in between.
Here. They do not stay in Romania.
Are you now arguing that people should stay here and not move to Germany or Ireland?
yeah, but
Are you arguing that?
but now what we see, it's a common European action. And what we see also that Hungary would be ready to accept these people.
Asylum-wise, Europe is divided into national asylum protection spheres. Refugees must not move to another country. We are the next country. Are you arguing that they should not move to Ireland, they should not move to Spain, because they should stay in Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova? These are the neighboring countries, and as it is frequently said, once they moved across a safe country, they are no longer refugees, which is rubbish in proper legal terms, so it's not true. But are you arguing that they should stay here?
And Professor also arguing that it's completely okay that somebody from Somalia and Ethiopia just deciding that no, I don't like Kenya because it's not
but how
a
does
nice
it differ
country.
from the Ukrainian deciding to go to Germany? That's
Because
what I don't see.
EU is a Schengen area. We don't have borders.
But
which
Ukrainians
are
are not
crossing.
affected by the Schengen area. They are Ukrainians. They are not.
But Hungary is affected the Schengen area because we are within the Schengen area.
But
without borders.
asylum-wise, it's not. There is no Schengen area in terms of asylum. Asylum is limited to the country which recognizes the person as a refugee. Refugees don't have a right to move to other EU countries for long. So there's no Schengen area in asylum.
Yes, but it will be the big question of the coming months if the war will not be over. That, as we mentioned, most of the people still not applying for asylum status because they have this 90-day visa within the Schengen area and European Union to move freely.
No, but what
currently, we don't see actually in legal term refugee crisis because people who are arriving legally, they actually not asylum seekers because they not submitted the asylum seeker. But even in the EU regulation is now that there will be solidarity clause inside. So when thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of asylum applications will be submitted in different parts of the European Union, as you mentioned now, people moving, most of them to Western Ukraine. it will be a case. How, for example, Eastern European countries will participate in this case. Perhaps will let people back to Hungary.
May I?
Yes, you may, although this has nothing to do with my question, but it's very interesting, so please,
I think it's
please
really
take a couple of
interesting
minutes.
because either we argue, which I'm very much in favor, that we see a European protection space, forget Schengen, Romania included, which is not in Schengen at the moment, Croatia, etc. So let's say the EU is a joint unified protection space. So whoever applies in whichever EU member state applies to the EU as a space. That's fine. But then, and I'm happy to support that, but then you can't make a difference between the Ukrainian and the Syrian, because they both are applying to an EU protection area, and they are seeking protection by a member state of the EU according to the rules of the European Union, which is then implemented in the national area. So I see no difference. I see no difference in moving from Hungary to Germany as opposed to from moving from Turkey to Germany. I see no difference in that.
Okay, so
Because legally there isn't.
maybe let me give the word back to, let's go ahead.
I
The
was
panel.
just really wondering because I didn't feel that the answers are tied to the question.
They are not, but it's fine.
I think that the possibility of printing money free of charge so far covers quite a lot of the consequences of letting millions and millions and millions of people. When the time would come up where the ECB will not be able to do what it is doing now, meaning that the financial resources currently financing of the debts of those countries for social purposes part, then probably people would realize that yes, to keep their own way of living or to choose to grant from their own money, where the money is not unlimited in a sense of what we have now. Now that would be a time where possibly the public perception of immigration or refugees and so on could change, because then they would see that the money is taken away from them and why it is so. And of course, emotionally, then of course we have to have them, but then when it's your money or your pocket which is suffering from that, again, free money is free money, so all in all governments can spend whatever they want now. But when the time comes when this will not be a case, then I would expect the European perception from normal ordinary people with the refugee and the asylum seekers question, that would definitely change.
Yeah, actually, I'm very curious to see, because for now everybody seems to, I think we can all agree, treat this this refugee crisis very differently from when we had migrants or refugees coming from outside the European cultural community. But that the reason for this seems to be that Ukrainians are closer to us culturally, geographically, in family ties and so on. But actually, that's what my question was pointed at, whether we can expect this to turn around once the situation becomes more permanent and more real. But I think that we're out of time, so I'm going to just close on an open question. Thank you so much. And we only have time for maybe one question if somebody would like. Please go ahead. No, hold on just 1 second. Somebody will bring you a microphone.
Thank you, Mikołaj Pisarski, Mises Institute of Economic Education, and I would like to double down on the question that Barbara asked earlier about the importance of language, and it's actually something that my wife, Kamila, who is a linguist, brought my attention to spin it on the other side, because now we are in the middle of extraordinary humanitarian effort, and we need to gather private resources, mostly private resources answered to this need. And have you observed that the word refugee and the connotations around it have somehow influenced the quality and quantity of help, especially private one, that is being transferred right now to the borders and into the Ukraine? Because in Poland we've seen a lot of this. People were expecting that these people will be basically wearing some destroyed shirts. They won't have anything. And these people from the Ukraine, in this particular situation, they come from wealthy cities, wealthy society, high level of human capital. So if you could comment on this.
Adnan, maybe, or what is that?
I'm willing to speak about that because it's a key aspect in Hungary. The government in 2015 decided to eliminate the term refugees because the term refugee or asylum seeker elicits natural sympathy. So they depicted every refugee as migrant, preferably as illegal migrant, which doesn't exist, but they use that terminology. So now I do believe that by returning to the use of asylum seeker and refugees in Hungarian, that opened the floodgates to publicly be supported in terms of expressing your solidarity with the refugees. Now, you are right, it's not that easy to understand that refugees need not look like poor people. But that's very much part of the legal conception. They are threatened people. Nobody said that refugees are poor. And that's why we don't have to concentrate on the social assistance to them. Many, hundreds of thousands of refugees are not poor. Neither were the Syrians poor at that time. They are threatened with persecution. And if that is understood by the way of using the term refugee and asylum seeker, that's very good. That should be done.
I agree. For decades, probably the developed word was used to the images of poor refugees from Africa mainly, malnourished, starving children, etc., etc. No, this is not the understanding of refugee, and yes, actually in Hungarian, I know in the Slavic languages, this is not even refugee. Refugee, the word is about refuge. In our languages, it is more about escaping the Hungarian and the Slavic, and maybe even the German. It is more about escaping. So it is much more telling about they are escaping danger. So I think
Efficiency.
So.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we will talk a little bit more about language use in the third panel, but now we are out of time, so thank you for your attention. We're going to take a few minutes break and set up for the next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.